Hi, I'm Patricia Allingham Carlson, and this is how I painted my watercolor Fragrance of Lilac. I had just painted a lilac in watercolor, but I wasn't quite satisfied that I'd said everything I wanted to say about lilacs for the spring. So I decided to paint it again. You know how you go outside on a spring day and the fragrance drifts through the air and just delights the senses, and that's lilacs blooming in purple and pink, just so beautifully. That's what I wanted to convey in this picture. I wanted to convey the lightness, the airiness, and the fragrance of a beautiful lilac bush in a natural way. I hope you'll like it and give it a thumbs up. Now let's paint. To begin, I elevated the top of my painting surface so the paint would feel free to drip. My reason for this was so it would be lightest in color at the top where light source would be hitting it, and darkest at the bottom of each clump where shadows would be. It worked pretty well, but it was an experiment to see what would happen. I sprayed the whole surface with water and then began to mix various shades of purples, blues, and pinks and dropped them lightly onto the surface of the splattered wet paper. Now the water wasn't everywhere, and there were areas where the paint or the paper was entirely dry. The paint would not then spread to these areas because I wanted to have some white showing through the lilac clump. I started with the clump on the left, and then I sprayed on the right side. Some of the colors that I'm using are permanent pink, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, purple, purple lake, and quin magenta. As you could see, I'm trying to dab the paint on in a way that would suggest clumps of flowers, because that's how lilacs grow, at least the lilacs bushes that I have in my garden. Can you see how some of the clumps are showing lighter at the top of the clump and darker at the bottom? That's the effect that I'm trying to get with elevating the paper plane. Now I've come in with some yellow ochres and I'm splattering them loosely into the semi-wet background. Sap green comes on next, as well as some viridian green. I'm also using some turquoise in these leaves. At this point, I'm suggesting leaves and keeping them very loose. A little bit of cadmium yellow is also coming into the picture. And where the cadmium yellow and the yellow ochres mix with the quin magenta and the permanent pink, they're making a nice shade that's sort of orange or peach, which I am liking with the coloring of the lilacs. I'm working here from a reference photo of the lilac bushes that I took outside of my house. And when I'm coming in to begin the stems of the branches, I am using burnt sienna as a primary color. I'm beginning to shape some of the leaves. Bring out the branch work. And trying to keep it loose with white showing through and light. I'm doing a little splatter painting to incorporate some colors in a more random way. And now I'm beginning to paint some individual flowers as well. Since I'm really liking how the yellows and yellow ochres are mixing with the pinks, I'm putting in more of them. I don't always choose my colors ahead of time. In fact, I usually don't. But I do use the color wheel frequently and try different colors in small ways. I'm using a real lilac branch to see where it would look good for me to have some more branches. And when I decide on where something would look good, I mark it in from the actual branch, and then I paint it. I do use the actual branch to observe how the bark looks and how the coloring looks and the shading. It's a very good reference to have an object from real life that you're actually copying. Now you'll notice I don't have the leaves all showing in full outline. I don't have the branches all showing all the way across, but rather I'm having the branches and the leaves be partially hidden by the flowers. That's how it looks to me on my bush and in the vase when I picked them. The leaves and branches intertwine with the blossoms, and not too much shows out right all the way across. So I'm painting these things sort of appearing and disappearing behind the clumps of fragrant lilac flowers. It's not the only way to do this, but it worked for me to suit the natural type of look I was trying to give in this painting. The whole thing had dried, and now I'm going back into certain areas to try to darken and do some detailing with individual flowers. I'm also doing some detailing with dark leaves showing through. If I cut the leaves off in a straight line, that wouldn't look real natural. So if they're ducking behind the flowers, then I sort of paint them out with a raggedy, edgy, floral type line where they go behind the flowers. And that's exactly what you're seeing me do here. It takes a lot of time. At least this partially controlled and partially loose approach that I'm taking. It also is taking observation of the actual flowers and clumps and what they look like. In this case, I'm looking at a dried up clump because I want to get all the little tiny stems that hold the structure together. So it's useful to look at the small branch even though it's already dry. Here you could see where I've painted in some of the small branches within an actual clump toward the middle of the painting. I'm also now working around the painting and detailing individual clumps to make each one stand out to the point where I'll be satisfied with how it looks. One of the things I'm focusing on is more detailing as we're getting closer to the front of the actual composition. Less detailing as the branches move back into space and further away from the eye. So these branches right up in the front and clumps of flowers are going to be the most detailed because they are actually coming forward in the plane toward the viewer. So they need the most attention to detail and the most work. And that's what you see me doing here. Clump of flowers by clump of flowers. As I skip around the clumps of flowers on this painting, you'll notice that each clump I am trying to keep with different values within that clump. And by values, I mean darknesses and lightnesses of the same colors. If a clump is light at the top, medium in some spots in the middle, and darker mainly at the bottom, and then in some spots where the flowers retreat and go inward, it shows a varying set of values of colors and looks more natural and real like life. Whereas if the clump of flowers was all the exact same color with no lights and darks and mediums, it would not be as interesting. The darks are used very well for accent colors, and they lead the eye around the painting. But the lights are needed to show a light source, as well as to lighten up the whole values of the floral painting. Flowers are, in many spots, light and shiny and fluffy, and when the light hits them, they sparkle and they shine. So having that show in the painting with various values of the color seems important to me. In some places, I'm leaving the colors almost untouched with any detailing to keep them light. In others, I'm doing much more detailing and shading. The same goes for the leaves. If you put down too many darks, you also can usually lighten the colors. Although you'll find the more you work your surface colors, the more easily they turn muddy. To keep them fresh in color, less work is probably better. But of course you can correct things to a large extent with watercolor, and people don't realize that. They think once it's down, it's down. But people who work with watercolor a lot, we know that you can lighten it. You also can darken it. And you can change the color quite dramatically by adding complementary colors or adjacent colors, as well as glazes. So I'm working around the foreground, the clumps that are the closest to the viewer, and then I'll be working backward in space toward the ones that go further back. They will get far less detailing and less color. I'm sure you all know, but leaves are not all green, all one green and one green only. If you mix colors into your leaves, you're going to get more natural looking leaves. You could try an experiment on a separate piece of paper. You could even try picking different leaves from outside and trying to match the color in your studio. But you'll find if you take a basic sap green or a hooker's green deep and mix it with a little bit of burnt sienna, you get a very natural color. If you mix it with a little bit of cadmium orange, just a little bit, you get another nice natural color. And if you bring in some cadmium red, just a touch, or some scarlet lake, just a touch, you'll get a duller green and less straight out of the tube green. It doesn't seem to exist all that much in real life. You could try mixing indigos, cobalt blues, and ultramarine blues with your green as well. The freshest, youngest spring leaves frequently will have cadmium yellow mixed with the greens, and they will make a beautiful shade of lime. If you experiment with your greens and try some different shades, I think you'll be satisfied with how they come out. So in this section here, I'm working backward to show one last clump that comes forward to a medium ground or a middle ground in front of a clump or two that goes further back into the background. So I'm bringing in some medium tones of colors or some medium values. They are not as bright or intensely concentrated as the closer ones. And it is starting to look more natural and more like a clump of a piece of lilac bush. At this point, I've decided that some of my leaves need more layers of deep colors for some further accent work. I'm doing the same with the branches. I'm bringing them out with darker tones and colors. And I think it works well for me to have the darker colors against the very ethereal and light lilac flowers. To darken the tones, I'm using some sepia and some indigo for the branches. I'm mixing in some purples and some hooker's green dark, as well as some indigos for the leaf work. It is best to build up your darkest colors slowly, if you can, because you can always get them a little darker. You can't always get them lighter and fresh to your satisfaction. Here I've taken another lilac leaf, arranged it in several different places until I found a place where I felt it worked in the composition. I painted in first with viridian green, and then I'm mixing in my dark on top while it's still wet, so it runs in an uneven way. playing around with a little turquoise here and some yellow ochre. And then darkening some more leaves. So I put the leaf right in that section and it looked right to my eyes. So I'm now wetting that section and coming in with some good dark colors to create the leaf. I am using turquoise and I am using yellow ochre here. Coming back for another painting session, I've made some notes for myself as to what would look like it needed improvement. And now I'm going to work. Maybe today I'll finish it. To get a composition right, you want it to be balanced. You want it to lead the eye around the painting in a lively way. You want it to have some logical places for the eye to stop and take a little rest, dwell on some pretty colors, and then to move on. And something else you want to try to do is keep the viewer's eye within the painting and not lead it right out of the work and onto something else. So a successful artwork will capture the viewer's eye, lead it around the painting, hopefully allow it to find some places to delight, enjoy, or ponder before moving on to another work. That's one of the reasons I frequently will cover up my painting from side to side or top to bottom to see if the sides are balanced in terms of interest, accent, and what they do. I'm adding a few more small branches in the background, as well as some more leaf stems. Also reglazing some other areas of leaves. And putting some soft suggestions of leaves in the background as well. That leaf I just painted at the top, that was a mixture of several greens with the cadmium yellow, which makes that very fresh lime green leaf that's a harbinger of spring. The darker leaf colors I'm using for the interiors and for accent work to make the clusters of flowers stand out more in their lightness against the dark clumps of leaves. Here I'm deciding to suggest a branch and leaves that go through past clumps of flowers, so they're very broken up, but they add a little structure to this side and section of the painting. I'm spraying down some background colors with water and then doing a bit more accenting and enhancing. You see how bright the colors are going on? They will not stay that bright. They will fade. And the way they were look just a little too pale for the rest of the composition. You could see how much they faded now that some time has passed and the colors are drier. I'm doing some final detailing. And this should be the wrap today. A little bit more accent with the deep greens. And some more Veriter green in a glaze to go on where the colors look nicely together. And you could see where I'm reglazing around the painting, primarily in the leaves. I'm doing a cover-up to see if any areas or sides need more development. So I just covered up the left side and it showed me some spots to work on the right side. A spray of water and a bit of green. You can see I'm keeping that very loose and very pale at this point. And now you see me flitting all about the paper in different spots and different sections. In some cases, I'm lifting a little color, and in some cases, I'm adding a little bit of color. These are the final touches to make the painting come together and be complete, to my satisfaction. In many cases at this point, I also soften colors. Here I've put up a stick to see if I need to enhance or darken the background branches, and I've decided to do a little bit of last minute darkening here and defining in this branch that runs through the painting. I've given it a slightly more important role in uniting the painting and pulling the composition together by making it darker and thicker. In case you were wondering, yes, I keep some attractive branches around my studio. Some of them are in vases, Some of them are in baskets. Branches I found that I thought were pretty. So I always have a branch around to grab. So I am using a mixture of burnt sienna and Van Dyke brown, which is a very deep brown. You know, the burnt sienna is more of a reddish or orangish brown. And I've brought a little bit of an additional branch through the background. And I think this unites the composition. So I'm satisfied with that work. A couple more teeny branches. And I made a little bit of splatter by mistake, so I'm throwing some yellow splatter in there deliberately. My signature, and it's done. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. My painting of Fragrance of Lilac, painting a natural clump of a lilac bush. And I showed you some various different steps for composition and how I apply paint and how I build up my color surface and textures. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe at the links below. And if you ring the bell, you'll get notified each time I make a new video. There's also links below to my Facebook page of art, my blog that I'm writing about art and life, some products I use when I create my art, and my own art products page for things that I sell with my art on them. Your comments are always welcome. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next video.